So here we are, lesson 9.1a, the last chapter of elementary algebra. And the name of this chapter is quadratic equations. You've worked with quadratic equations a lot. Maybe you don't know it or maybe you don't remember it, but you have done it. And quadratic equations are equations that basically have an x squared in them. So when you have something like that, remember that's the difference of two squares. So you take the square root of the first term, square root of the second term, put a plus and minus sign in there and you're done. Okay? And you just solve that. Also, remember that we did some that looked like this. And remember, we set it equal to 0, so we subtracted the 12 from both sides. And we multiplied this times this. Look for two numbers multiplied together, give me negative 24, added together, give me a negative 5. So we do a 6 and a 4 and an 8 and a 3, a 12 times a 2. And we find out that if we did this, negative 8 times 3 is negative 24, and added together give you the negative 5 there. So what we did then, okay, remember this? The negative 5, so a negative 8 plus 3, and we wanted the plus sign there, and then we grouped. And we pulled a 2 out of there and an x, and we're left with x minus 4. Pulled a 3 out of there, and we're left with x minus 4. And remember, these have to be the same. Put those together. And then we set 2x plus 3 equals 0, and x minus 4 equals 0. So x equals 4, and we subtract 3, and we get 2x equals negative 3, divide by 2, and we get x is negative 3 halves, and x equals 4. Okay, so that's how we solve those. This is old stuff. We did this a while back. If you need some review, then might be a good idea to go back and do some checking there, but that was example 2 in 9.1. Okay, let's jump to example 3, and this again is another review. Nothing new yet. Alright, so first thing I do, I have two terms. When I have two terms like that, first thing I want to do is see if I can take the square root of the second one, the square root of the first one, square root of the second one, and is there a minus sign? If I can do that, then it's the difference between two squares. And it's just the square root with a plus and a minus sign. And then we do the 4a minus 5 equals 0 from here. And there. 4a equals 5, divide by 4, and subtract 5, 4a equals negative 5, divide by 4, a equals negative 5 fourths. So there's my two answers. Okay, so again, review. Now let's get into the stuff for this section. And this is the square root property. Okay. Now they give you a property in the middle of page 589 that is a good explanation for the square root property, but it's very, very hard to understand. So what I want to do, rather than trying to get you to understand the abstractness of this property, I'm just going to do some examples and let you learn how to use the property rather than necessarily understanding at this point what all it means. So, for example, When we were doing other stuff, if I had something like that, what did you do to get rid of the radical? You squared both sides, and you get x equals 81. Okay, that was the last chapter. Now, we're going to make a little bit of a different change here. If I have x squared equals 5, so instead of writing it the square root of x equals 9, in squaring both sides, I'm giving you the squared version here, and we're trying to get rid of that 2 up there. We have to find out what x is. X squared equals 5, but I don't care what x squared is. I want to know what x is. So, when we get rid of the radical, we squared both sides. So what do you think you do to get rid of the squared right here? You take the square root of both sides. And then these all come off, and we get x equals the square root of 5. Now, one of the things I want you to know and not forget is when you take the square root of both sides, there's a plus or minus sign that goes there. Okay? So x is the square root of 5, the plus, and it's the negative square root of 5. Those two answers are possible. Okay? So remember, when you take the square root of both sides, always put a plus or a minus there. Alright, let's keep going with some examples. And we are in example 5 already. Alright, so the problem says 5a squared equals 60. Okay, again, what we're going to do is we're going to isolate. We're going to get whatever is being squared all by itself. So we're going to divide by 5, divide by 5. So a squared equals 12. Square root, square root. So a equals the square root of 12, plus or minus. Is the square root of 5 simplified? No. So we keep going. So yes, a is the plus or minus the square root of 5, or 12, plus the square root of 12, and negative square root of 12. But we have to simplify the square root of 12. So let's just do a real quick review here. Whoops. Are there two numbers multiplied together that give us 12, and one of those I can take the square root of? Yes. Square root of 4 times 3. So I'm going to take the square root of 4 and pull it out, and the square root of 3 stays there. So that ends up being my final answer. Alright, let's jump to example number 6. So I have y plus 4, and let's square that, equals 25. Alright, so remember, we're trying to get rid of this radical. First of all, we isolate, or not the exponent. We've isolated it here, right here. There's nothing added or subtracted to this exponent because the y plus 4, because it's in parentheses, this is one unit here being squared. Alright, so to get rid of that squared, we take the square root of both sides. And don't forget the plus or minus. It's always two answers. Okay. What is the square root of 25? 5. So we get a plus or minus 5. So, let's go ahead and subtract 4 from both sides. So y equals a positive 5 minus 4 and a negative 5 minus 4. Because remember, we have a plus or a minus here. That means that we have a plus 5 and a minus 5. So we're going to get two answers. Remember, if you have an exponent of 2 up here, you're going to get two answers. The plus 5 portion, minus 4, and the negative 5 portion. So plus 5 minus 4 is 1. Negative 5 minus 4 is negative 9. So you get two answers there. Okay? Alright, so example 7. What are we going to do? Square root both sides. So 2x minus 3 equals, don't forget the plus or minus. Okay, square root of 25 is 5. All right. So let's go ahead and solve for x. So we're going to add 3 here and add 3 here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just write it as that for right now until I get everything over on the left-hand side. So I'm going to divide by 2, divide by 2. So x equals plus or minus 5 plus 3 over 2. Now let's split them up. So we have x equals plus 5, and we have x equals negative 5. Okay, and since we have a plus and a minus. So this is 8 over 2, which equals 4. And this is negative 5 plus 3, negative 2 over 2, which is negative 1. So there are my two answers. Again, when there's a 2 up here, you know you're going to have two answers. And we have a 4 and a negative 1 there. Okay, let's jump to example number 8. And in fact, I'm going to stop here because I've got example 8, 9, holy cow, 10, and 11 yet. So I'm going to start a new video here. So end of 9.1a.